You are listening to the Mohua Show, where it's all about celebrating the Junoon among changemakers and their journey.
A diagnosis is never for a person, it's always a diagnosis, always for the family. I have seen the absolute exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, that families never ever recover from.
How has working so closely, with aging families and loss changed you as a leader?
It's not easy to admit to yourself that I need help as a child to care for my parent. And caregiver burnout is a very, very real. There are studies which have proven that you have been a caregiver for more than a couple of years, you are affected mentally and physically. After COVID, we saw that change because COVID changed the narrative and how. So I think that's when the industry, the elder care industry, and it's really upcoming sunrise industry where people, change makers, really they're coming to really solve for a problem.
So, how do you see responsibility, guilt, and love being renegotiated inside modern Indian families?
So definitely caregiving can never be, you can think you can empathize, but you truly can't if you haven't gone through it. So one is that. And second, this take advice from someone who has really gone through this, because then that's really the real deal. From people who seek caregiving, I think do your homework well. Again, because these are elders, they're vulnerable. Because this is India, we're talking about it's a low integrity society, and this is a space of ethics. Let's just be very honest about it.
So, what happens when the people you once cared for us slowly begins to need care for themselves? A question that many of us do not ask actually when we are young. In a country that we know is aging faster than it's really ready for. So in India, millions of families are quietly struggling, with dementia, loneliness, and the emotional weight of watching parents grow old. It's really grief. Yet we rarely talk about all of this out loud. Most of us try and keep all of this hidden and, to ourselves. So I'm extremely honored today to be joined with Neha. And we are going to open up a conversation with our guest, Neha Sinha, the co founder and CEO of Epoch elder care, and a clinical psychologist who has spent her life working at the intersection of aging, dignity, and compassion. So this conversation today is really very, very heartfelt, for me, and this is for all my listeners also, because she's going to tell us today what aging really looks like behind closed doors, why caregiving is one of the hardest emotional journeys, and for me, this is so personal, Neha, and how we can build a more humane, dignified future for our seniors. So, Neha, this podcast for me is personal. Thank you so much for taking out the time and coming here today.
Thank you, Moha. I'm equally honored and thank you so much. I'm always, always very happy and encouraged whenever people want to talk about this because this is such a unspoken, underestimated topic.
So, Neha, let's just talk about Epoch. It didn't begin as a business idea, it began as something very personal. When you came to this realization that elder care was where your life's work needed to be, and it's a very tough space. So, tell me a little bit about the start, Neha.
So I think I would begin with saying that I've been, brought up by my grandparents, and that's why my lens is always of being a, grandchild and how do I solve for, my dadu and dida. Been brought up by them, was very close, and my natural affinity was always to spend time around elders. I genuinely enjoyed it. So that was how it naturally began. Originally, actually, Moa Epoch was founded to solve for loneliness. So our lens was to provide intellectual companionship. So if I'm not around my Dadu and Dida, how does a Neha, go there and spend time? Because you can spend money if you're resourceful, you can get other people, but you can't get your daughter or you can't get your grandchild to come and engage with you and share with you and so on. So that was the start of Epoch's journey. But eventually, I realized that trying to solve for a problem where, let's say if it's a cake, I'm trying to provide the cherry when the cake is not there. And that was when the focus on serious conditions like, chronic illnesses and dementia and so on came to light. And I realized when somebody reached out to me with a health issue and not just the medical solution, but the whole holistic solution surrounding caregiving, emotional, spiritual, cognitive, all those needs, I didn't have an answer. And I realized that, this is the area that needs to be solved for families because they need professional help. They need a professional answer. It's not just about the community coming together, but it's also as much about professional health.
So Neha, you touched my heart when you say this, and especially the way you say Dadu and Dida, because my son was also hugely influenced with his Dadu, my father who also had dementia, which we will talk about later, during the podcast. But let's talk about building a caregiving organization in India, especially as a woman, which means navigating emotions, stigma, money, family, expectations all at once. And oh my God, I mean, the thought itself is like overwhelming. So, how has working so closely, with aging families and loss changed you as a leader and as a human being? Because I think loss, love, all of these things are really the markers in our lives. They change us so deeply. And we probably do not know all of these things unless you've had a loss of love, unless you've had betrayal, unless you've had death. These are the things that are really the shifts in our lives. So tell me a little bit about you as a woman. How did you navigate all of this?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're talking about and you brought up the subject death. Death and illnesses, and anything. I mean, a diagnosis is never for a person. It's always a diagnosis, always for the family. And yes, I mean, we have seen families change. I have seen the absolute exhaustion, emotional exhaustion that families never ever recover from. You can see that. And you can see it's so complicated to ask for help, Mohua, first of all. It's not easy. It's not easy to admit to yourself that I need help as a child to care for my parent. The guilt, the social wiring, the decades of conditioning that you are supposed to do what you're supposed to do, and this is very strong in Asian Indian cultures where as a child you feel you're being judged, and sometimes you are judged. So it's so much more than when you run a business, it's so much more than just it being a viable business model or it the market being affordable and so on. They're a very small part when you're in this space. The actual thing that you need to solve for is the whole sociology around it, right? How do you put together those pieces and make it an acceptable thing to subscribe to? And as a leader, initially, obviously, you are in your 20s. I was in my own 20s when I started this. You have a very different vision. You're full of, I will do this, I will do that. Your vision and your mission drive you. It still drives me today. But there are so many reality checks. There are so many reality checks when families when you're preparing to solve for, let's say if I'm talking about dementia, preparing to solve it as a service, right? You put together the constructs of a service, you put a model in place, you figure out how to take it to the market and so on. But all of that just goes for a toss when a family is sitting in front of you and says, how do I deal with this guilt? Everything aside, I can take this decision, but how do I live with this guilt? How can I tell my mom that I'm not going to be there for you? And to explain that choosing, for example, a professional service is not letting go of your mom or her responsibility. So I think these are aspects that change you. It makes you think so hard. There are answers you're constantly looking for, honestly.
My God, I mean, it just frightens me to even think that I don't think I'll be able to put myself together, Neha, to say that the emotional drain is so much, when elders also, when elders become so needy because they've already lost that entire will to live. And, we're going to come to the next part, which is about nuclear families, So India, we know, has quietly shifted from joint families into this nuclear homes. And, I was raised in a nuclear family setup where my mom broke the entire rule of leaving the joint family. And I'm a single child and I grew up in that system. And then eventually children move away and both parents are working, which I grew up with. And my son, my only child, lives in London and I live in India, and I'm not growing younger by any measure. So how has this changed about aging parents experience in terms of care, loneliness, and emotional security? Like, I try and be there for my mother, but there is resentment. Because Neha, is the first time in my life I feel that I'm a single woman now, after many years of being married. And for the first time, I think I've got wings and I'm unable to fly because, there are responsibilities. And in a joint family setup, you probably have an aunt in whose home, your mother can go and spend time, or your father can go and spend time, or But here in nuclear families, you don't even have that setup because you've moved away from your own city, or your own town or your own village. So, Neha, tell me a little bit from your experience, how does this go?
Yeah, it's complicated. There's no
Very.
straight answer to this, and it's so individual. It's so value system driven. It's so
Yeah.
conditioning driven. It's everything. And there is an added complication if you're a woman. There's no doubt about it. As women, we tend to take more responsibility than we are asked to. We just built that way. It's nothing unusual. So it's difficult, but I think the decision making and the lens that I try to tell families is don't try to solve for everyone else. You have to solve for yourself. And if you can't, you rather only you can figure out what will work for you. And this is so much more mental and emotional than anything else. You will not have the physical strength to find for solutions if you are not emotionally taken care of. And one of the things that I really, really advocate about as a caregiver is that you need to take a break and don't judge yourself when you're doing that. If you cannot just survive at a go 24/7, you will end up not doing the caregiving bit. You will end up not justifying why your parent is with you, should you choose to have them with you. And ultimately you will be just exhausted, and caregiver burnout is a very, very real thing, again underspoken. It has biological implications, there are health implications, it has long-standing implications. There are studies which have proven that you have been a caregiver for more than a couple of years, you are affected mentally and physically, right? And by the way, these are all factors which add up to premature aging. Again, there's so much work that is going on in the longevity space, and how do you prepare to age, right? And I think the family setup, yes, because we used to rely so much on our neighbors and our community, and that doesn't exist today. Yes, but the difference is that the boomers, yes, they still have that expectation that my child is going to be there, and the millennials, the generation under them, whichever way you put it, we are also very, very obliged, and we feel that no, if we don't do it, then nobody else can. Again, the whole judgment piece. But if you ask our generation how we are preparing, the current generation who are in their 40s and above, I don't think there is an expectation there. So things begin to change from that generation. It's so important because it's a cycle. It's a very controversial take, but what happens is when you end up sacrificing so much for your child, there is an automatic expectation that this is what I need to get back. So it needs to be balanced out, and that's how the Western worlds manage it, right? So elder care is not an individual responsibility, it's as much the governments and the community, in a structured way, I'm saying, in a professional way. And you are it's completely fine. In fact, you're almost supposed to move into a home or have caregivers at home. That's how the society is built. But here it was an exception. After COVID, we saw that change because COVID changed the narrative. And how, you know, you were not there. You thought you're going to take a flight and be home. You thought you could drive and go to your parent, but all those things just so I think that's when the industry, the elder care industry, and it's really upcoming sunrise industry where people, change makers, really they're coming to really solve for a problem. We saw so many people coming up, stepping forward, starting these small, small initiatives to solve for this. So, what one needs to do is we need to accept, yes, we are going to be nuclear setups. We are going to be moving towards more and more of an individual society. Sure, our value systems remain, but we need to prepare for, setting up the ecosystem. And that ecosystem is not just family, it's also professionals.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for saying this. So earlier caregiving was shared across families. I mean, I see my Pishi, which in Bengali Pishi is, your father's sister, and they all live in Guwahati, and they all stay next to each other. So one Pishi falls ill, the other Pishi will come and see her. Unlike me in Bangalore, we have very little family. We actually don't have anyone. Again, nuclear setup, single child. So today it really rests on one exhausted son, one exhausted daughter like me who's talking to you, or a spouse, which can be it can really, blow you out with all that you have to do, So, how do you see responsibility, guilt, and love being renegotiated inside modern Indian families? And I keep seeing so many of these posts where, you have this moral brigade trying to tell this girl or this boy who's dropping their parent, into an old age home. And sometimes it's not right what they're doing. And they're trying to hold on to all of these things, this moral brigade, but then one doesn't know how do you enter that space and understand, finances, emotional burden, their own life. It's so confusing, Neha, for me. And, I'd really like you to, break this down for our listeners.
Yeah. Um, I think firstly, the moral brigade, as you was rightly saying it, there's so many people who have, sometimes not the right advice at the right time because only you know what the context of your situation is. So definitely caregiving can never be, you think you can empathize, but you truly can't if you haven't gone through it. It's one of those rare things in life where if you're saying you understand, then you should have gone through it to say what it means. So one is that, and second, therefore, taking at least I would suggest I was really tell this is take advice from someone who has really gone through this because then that's really the real deal. And sometimes coming together with other caregivers, you might just find a solution that works. So many angles, many factors to how caregiving or what looks like. I would begin by saying the people who are providing these caregiving services, the first responsibility lies with them is to ensure that you set up examples of how lives have changed and how impact has positive impact has truly improved quality of life for both the person and the caregiver. The moment you're sending the wrong caregiver or there are not enough governance in place or you there's an incident, you it's a cycle. People, the wrong word spreads and people are like, oh my god, they're not reliable. And doesn't help that this space is not very regulated in India. It's not standardized, so you're not really you don't have certified caregivers showing up at your space. It's very person dependent. So when somebody looks seeks for professional help, then it's the care providers, the service providers responsibility to ensure that they have a fantastic experience. And that's how the confidence in the society builds up, that please, let's do this outsourcing. The same is for moving into a home, assisted living homes and other care homes. They should do a damn good job and ensure. And it's not easy because you're trying to replace a child, right? And you can never replace a child. So I tell this to all families who come here. I say, I can never do what you do. I can only try to be close to what your expectation of looking after your parent is. And that's a hard fact, right? So that's the tough part about, the other side of filling the gap, right? And how do you solve for it professionally, the service providers? Of course, capital needs to come in, the government needs to come in. There's so many pieces. It needs to be easy to do this, to solve for this problem, right? All those barriers need to be removed. From people who seek caregiving, I think do your homework well. Again, because these are elders, they're vulnerable. And again, you don't want a wrong incident to reinforce the guilt. You should feel proud for the choice that you've made, right? So, do your homework, pick the right organization, ask the right questions, put the right audit systems in place. All of that will need to be done because this is India we're talking about. It's a low integrity society, and this is a space of ethics. Let's just be very honest about it. So I think the both sides have to play their role in figuring this out. And I think just do it. I mean, do what works for you. Look for solutions and answers that will impact your quality of life, and kind of just strengthen the ecosystem that you're building.
So, Neha, I really like the word that you use, ethics, which I think, again, is so individual led. So, when we talk about elder care, honestly, people just think that it's hospitals, it's medicines, and, what have you really seen, from seniors? What is it that they really crave, in everyday life? I know that emotionally and socially, I assume that they really crave the old circle and they keep talking about the past. I spend time with my mother. My mother and me, we live together, but um, I want to know what is the situation like in homes where, if today I was abroad and I was working somewhere else and I would have provided her with all the, comfort, what do you think she would crave?
Purpose. That's really the one thing that across cultures, geographies. uh, the moment there is a retirement, formal, professional, or otherwise, for female, elderly females, it's also, when children go away, and you more than empty nest, I think they're really entwined in their lives. It's, what am I living for? What is the answer? Why should I, what do I do when I am an 90-year-old? And we are talking not just about a couple of years. Today, longevity has really, sort of enabled a couple of decades. They've added a couple of decades in our lives. So,
Damn.
how is this? Yeah, and how do we, kind of improve, or how do we look forward to the 70 to 90 decade? Why should I, kind of, invest in my health, etc., do all of these things? What will happen? And that's a question. If some elder comes and tell me, kya karenge, what should I do? How am I, what is happiness? It's not abstract, by the way. It's not abstract, and it's not about just solving for comfortable space and ensuring that your checklist is, as a child you often have this checklist, right, that the medication is solved for, the tests are done, food is arranged. But it's not that. It's really, how do we enable them to get up in the morning and say, I look forward to tomorrow. So that's the lens through which we should also solve for this problem, once we have fixed, the of course, the base of the issues. And that comes a lot to do with community, relationships, as a child. And it's difficult to solve for this again as a child, because you're doing all the roles. So you can't be taking her to the hospital, you can't be making sure that everything is fine at home, emergency response is set up, and also disconnecting and playing a nice game or listening to music. It is difficult. You can't play those roles all together. And that's why professionals can, you're trained, to sort of just spend 2 hours and take them out or talk about something without baggage, without context. It kind of helps a lot. This was the original thought process of Epoch's companionship. So in a nutshell, yes, it's loneliness, but it's also living with purpose, autonomy, preserving their independence. How do I feel that I'm not dependent on you? Nobody likes being dependent, whatever age group, right? So a lot of it has to come from education, right? So how do we enable the soon to be elders of today, that how do you invest in A, B, and C, which is, let's say, health, finance, and something like nutrition and physical exercise. How do you invest in these so that your 70s, 80s are independent, you don't have a caregiver to look after you? There are not too many conversations around this, like simple things like strength training or the relevance of physiotherapy. How do you modify your diet, adding protein in your diet, playing cognitive stimulation, the whole concept of stimulating or learning something new, encouraging hobbies. The Western society, they're built to encourage hobbies, but in Indian societies you don't have the time, you're always focusing on work. But actually, if you think about it, it is these hobbies which after 60s and 70s you can pick up and add that purpose in your life. So these are, I would say, these are a couple of pieces that need to be thought about.
So, Neha, let's talk about loneliness. It's one of the most invisible struggles, in aging. And so, why do you think it goes unnoticed for so long, and how can this be structured and, with compassionate care, and how families, cannot sometimes do it all by themselves. My ma is very lonely. I try and fill up that space, but I can't, because I'm also dealing with my own loneliness in a city that, I sometimes feel that I'm done and over with, and yet you're caught with all of that. So let's talk a little bit about loneliness from your lens, Neha.
You can't. So, as a child, very difficult to fill that space. So don't hold yourself up to it at all. It's just the reality of the sandwich generation that we can do everything, but cannot, just don't have the bandwidth, not the time, the bandwidth to sit and really chat. You will do it, of course, once in a while, but it needs on an everyday basis. It's difficult to do. I think the answer lies in never ever letting go of friendships. And I'm consciously saying friendships because it's not a word you relate with, in the elderly world. But individual relationships and enabling that you have your own circle, that is where the loneliness kind of begins to creep in, because your reliance on your own family members and relatives is so high. And then eventually, when you get old, your fellow age, people in the same age group, they began passing away, and then it really really becomes, you feel very alienated. You can't relate to anyone anymore. So and it can't be built overnight. The answer to this is, so it needs to start you in your 60s. Don't let go of relationships and your circle. Force yourself and to create those circles. And as a child, to enable your mom to go out and quote unquote make friends is difficult. But I think somewhere, I totally get it. But somewhere, I think there are many professional, by the way, service providers also, where you can subscribe to these clubs, both virtual and communities in person, because elders are so much to do with in person, right? That's one way of doing it. Just pushing them to kind of go into the society and park or somewhere, some events where they can build some meaningful relationships which they mutually enjoy. So, and it's not family. The other is, somewhere technology for the generation that can adopt it, right? I have also seen 90-year-olds adopt it. Technology in a way has both pros and cons, but here the advantage is that they can truly feel connected, because you do face mobility issues. You cannot go out. Not every space is elder friendly. You're scared to leave your parent alone. You can't always have a caregiver accompanying them. So yes, physically traveling and this and that, the whole logistics of it is this. So therefore, if they are enabled via, they are the generation that can actually benefit from social media and probably feel in a way connected. If they connect to their, they find their friends or their friends' children and so on. I've seen many stories where the Instas and Facebooks of the world, which are completely redundant in the upcoming generation, but they're still relevant for that generation.
Yeah, yeah,
Also,
yeah.
things like WhatsApp and Zoom. So this happened in COVID, that oh my god, I can actually video call and speak to my friend. So I think these things need to be encouraged. They spend hours video calling here, there, everywhere, sending those good mornings. They're not necessarily a bad thing, to be honest.
Wonderful. I find my mother all the time scrolling on YouTube, and sharing with me absolutely AI based, some very, very ridiculous news. And she needs to be told that no, that's not what it is, and having a conversation around it. So yeah, it is. So I'm going to talk to you now about something that's very, very close to my heart, and also for a lot of people who dismiss dementia as old age issue. And, what are those early signs that families should really start taking seriously? And how does, stigma really delay people from getting the right support? And honestly, Neha, I didn't understand when my father's dementia had begun. And I used to keep thinking as to why is he blaming everyone, people who've been in my home for having stolen things from him. And it I and I didn't recognize the man anymore because he was very egalitarian in his attitude towards people. And suddenly he was telling me that people are stealing, people are taking things from him. And I used to get very angry, Neha, and I'm so guilty about it now because there's been a certain amount of understanding, let's just say. I want to know from you, what are those early signs that one needs to really take into cognizance?
So don't at all beat yourself up, Mohua. I mean, it's so difficult to be a caregiver in itself, and being a caregiver for someone with dementia, I would say not comparable, because if I take any other serious illness, and of course we understand what medical conditions ask from a caregiver, but in dementia, the only context that I would like to set for listeners is you lose the person as well, right?
Yeah,
In any other illness, you have that person sitting with you, having a conversation. You can actually counsel them, hear from them, their perspective, and so on. But you completely lose this in
yeah,
dementia, right? And by definition, just setting the summary of the illness over here, it's a neurological condition, but it has psychiatric symptoms, right? Which is why a lot of people also end up thinking it's a pure mental health condition, but the mental health piece comes from biological reasons. So your neurons in your brain cells, and your brain cells, sorry, they die. So putting it very, very simply, it's like a brain injury. Areas of your brain, they kind of deteriorate, and ultimately your brain shrinks and you see the corresponding symptoms. It begins with memory loss, but is so much more than memory loss. So it begins with losing short-term memory, which is I forgot who I met in the morning today, or what I had for breakfast, or where I went out, and so on. But you will retain for very long, possibly that where you were born, who were your childhood friends, your ma baba, and so on. But it works in reverse. So you will sort of start forgetting your children, or the let's say if you have three children, you will forget who's older, who's younger. You mix up relationships, and ultimately you may stop recognizing your children, and that's so painful, right? It layer by layer, you basically see the person, kind of move away, right? And they ultimately stay in a bubble. And from the other side, if you're looking at someone, looking after someone professionally, the way we do it is that, after a certain point, they are in their own space, in their own bubble, in their own, in a way, time space. You don't disrupt that. You just accept them in that space and care for them in that manner. So for example, if they think this is 1950s and they are in Kolkata and this is that era, you don't sort of disturb that narrative. But it's easier said than done. Very difficult for family members to accept this narrative, right? Especially because, like you said, your father's personality was a certain way. You saw him as a certain person with these value systems, and suddenly they're completely contrasting, and you're like, who is even this person? My dida had dementia, and when she was bringing me up, I think my dadu and dida, for the longest time, they were like, how it happens. They're like, we're so excited about the day you will get married, for example, right? uh, Ultimately, the day I got married, my Dida was there, but she had no understanding that it was that day. And she was there, in the mandap. I looked at her. I didn't even know whether she registered that I am the bride. And, those moments stay with you forever. And I can never forget that day. My dadu passed away much earlier. They didn't, my biggest, I'll not say regret, but I'll say my biggest, emotion that I have with respect to my dadu Dida is that they don't know that I am working in this space. But I turn it around and use it as an inspiration. So for Dida, my ma and Mashi went through the same phase. They were like, she's being very unreasonable, and we don't understand why she's become so stubborn. Like, she would use certain unparliamentary words sometimes, and we would be like, it's like, I can't accept it. That, my ma and Mashi would be like, we can't accept that Ma is like this, kind of a thing. So I think the medical angle of looking after dementia is there. There are certain medications. So it's progressive in nature and did not have a treatment so far. But the good news is only last year breakthrough treatment has come into the picture, and you actually have drugs that are beginning to work on early stage dementia. So for the upcoming decades, so there's a lot of hope in that. There's also early diagnosis that has come in. That is, you can use a blood test, what you went through, because you did not know, right? And it's so subjective. But today there's a blood test which, with a prick, can diagnose it as Alzheimer's or any other type of dementia. I think that clarity for a child is so important, that you are not in this constant duality, that whether this is a personality issue, this is an anger issue, is this depression, by the way, is this any other trauma kicking in? No, it's a clear answer that it's a neurological condition like Parkinson's or stroke or PSP. There are so many other conditions. So that clarity, I think, will definitely help people. Once we have the clarity on diagnosis, what do we do? Nobody really puts the story together. So what you would have struggled with is, what does stage progression look like? What will happen in a stage 3, 4, 5, 6? How do I prepare for these stages? How do I prepare for myself? What are the key non-negotiables that I need to keep in place, sorry, so that the quality of life is preserved? I think professionals in this space, like myself, we have the responsibility to educate families, the moment they have a diagnosis, that look, this is going to be a long journey. This is what you need to be prepared for emotionally, mentally, financially, socially, every which way. And this is how, you kind of divide roles and responsibilities, because one person cannot do this for 5 years, 10 years, sometimes it's 12 years,
I've done
sometimes
it over 25 years. I have been a caregiver for my father-in-law who had cancer. I've been a caregiver for my Dida. I've been a caregiver for my father, and now I'm a caregiver for my mother. And I can tell you
hats
that
Hats off. You truly, I mean, I don't know how you recharge yourself or how you're healing yourself, but it takes a lot to give. It's only giving, right?
it's only
That's the role.
giving.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
only
So
giving and giving and giving.
yeah. And it's so difficult to be selfless all the time. You can't be. You
No,
can't be. It's not
it's
possible.
and then what happens is that all of these personality things also start spilling over in the relationships around you. You know, you become the giver in every space of your life because subconsciously you've been the giver all along, and there is hurt, there is exhaustion, there is tiredness because you're not getting it back,
That's
and
so true.
you accept it, as a way of life because that's what you've been doing from my teenage years. I've been looking after my mother. My father's had health issues all along, and so like I keep telling you, Neha, that this podcast is so close to my heart. I can't begin to tell you. uh,
I'm so glad.
yeah, so Neha, let's just talk a little bit about, empathy-led professional care, for palliative care, because I know that there was palliative care conversations around cancer, but dementia and, Alzheimer's and, Parkinson's, there is no conversation around it. And also as a caregiver, who do I turn to, is what is the question that many women, and especially because this role is so gender specific, it actually a woman is just expected, to look after everyone. And sometimes, it can be resentful. You can have a whole lot of issues with that, of being this caregiver for aging parents. So tell me a little bit about this emotional, mental load that you see women carrying around in society, and also about empathy led professional palliative care. Has that begun at all in India?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, so I'll address the palliative piece. So palliative care is synonymous with terminal illnesses. So, and there are many good organizations, a lot of them in the not-for-profit space, who really know how to support the family. And it's palliative care is more support for family, less for the person going through this himself or herself. Um, in elder care, it's strange. That basically you don't give it the importance that a palliative case otherwise would get, if you know what I mean. It basically implies that the moment you have a diagnosis like dementia or Parkinson's, you automatically know it's going to be palliative in nature, which means that ultimately the person is going to pass away because of deteriorations of this or other comorbidities and so on. But because the assumption in elder care is the person is going to pass away anyway, so you don't sort of do the pieces that are supposed to be in place when it is proper palliative care. What does that mean? It means that when you have identified that a particular care plan in a way has reached the palliative space, which means there is no cure for it. You're not doing curative treatment, you're not doing aggressive, let's say, antibiotics, or you're not doing any invasive therapies or techniques to kind of prolong the life. You're only looking at quality of life. That it means that you also start valuing other things which are non-medical in nature, which the person may value at this stage of life. So first is, of course, supporting the family and what they need. How do you solve for their problem? Providing like a social worker, a mental health counselor, a therapist in space who takes care of this angle. And every caregiver needs a counselor for themselves. They need a therapist. The Gen Z generation is very open about seeking help. They're very happy to go to a therapist, and there's absolutely no stigma, and that's one good thing about this. We
Thank
think
God.
twice, thrice But yes, they do. I have seen so many young, yeah, we're going to a therapist. So that is very important for a person to seek professional help from a person who's unbiased, objective, and all of that, right? The other piece in palliative is really looking at, what the person, the bucket list wanted to do, really helping them understand or fulfill wishes, though they are important for closure for both parties. I place huge value in doing these things. So if an elderly who is in a wheelchair, is 90-year-old and wants to go for a movie, we have to make that movie happen. So it's so important for that, again, like closure, and what the work you do. Also, planning for the end. That's also, a lot of people also get caught up because they're not prepared for it. It can also mean things like, ensuring the will is in place, you have all financial planning is in place, because we are very bad at financial planning because we don't talk about death. That's why, I said that at the start. You don't talk about death, you don't plan for death, and that's why also it becomes so traumatic for a lot of people who are alone, who don't know how to figure it out, how to even get a death certificate. These are not small things. They really, at that time, when you're really, the last time in the world, when you want to figure out how to get it done. So these parts also play their role. So all of these are parts of how you look at palliative care. As women caregivers, I think, yes, it's unfortunate that the role, because probably women are naturally good at caring. Not that men are not, but women are, have that affinity to naturally, kind of show warmth. They're more expressive and so on. So yes, the burden falls on the woman, and God save the woman who's working and managing a child and a caregiver, because the expectation today from that woman, by the way, is, oh, you need to be a superwoman. Just being a woman is not enough. So that's the unfortunate part, especially for the younger women, that, oh, you had a baby, come on, so what? So many people have babies. You're supposed to get up and come join work.
Oh,
You're
yes,
looking after a parent. Come on.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, people have normalized being superwomen. And I actually, when I joined back work, and, I also had, I have small twin boys. I went through postpartum myself. And I was amazed that, there were some people who were like, oh, come on, you are an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you can deal with this. And I'm like, no, I don't want this to be normalized at all. It did take a lot for me to manage, pregnancy and postpartum, and come back to work, run this business, be an entrepreneur, find these answers. The same thing for caregiving. A lot of it is just normalized and taken for granted. You are expected, and a lot of men, in a way, not all, some, end up also saying, it's kind of works for them that, I'm not good at it, instead of putting in the effort to learn it. Okay, tell me how to do it. But it's like, I think you were the good one, so I will. Or just waiting to be instructed. So sometimes it's just so exhausting making that list of instructions. A lot of women listeners would probably agree to this. The exhausting part is creating that list of instructions, because we need someone to share the mental load. And when you look at caregiving, you are doing a micromanagement, and nobody better than you would understand this. 25 years, I'm still sort of reading from that. You're looking at planning minute to minute. Okay, the breakfast is done. Okay, that medicine needs to be given. Okay, that medicine was given first. The bath needs to be done. Somebody needs to pick up this. The lunch needs to be. It's there all the time. It's there all
Yeah,
the time.
all the
How
time.
how do you deal with that? So people need to understand that it's not about resources and five people standing in front of these women, but it's about truly sharing the mental load by taking away something from the plate. Don't worry, I'll think about this.
Mhm. I don't have anyone to take it away from me, and I can say this on record. I was expected to do it all by myself, and I do not know how to even say that I'm tired. It's just now that I've begun to articulate this to my child that I'm very, very exhausted. And I almost feel guilty when I say that I'm exhausted, Neha. Still that entire expectation.
You should be
So,
so proud of yourself. So
Neha,
proud.
So, Neha, we praise women for managing everything, but we rarely ask what it costs them, So, why do you think caregiver burnout and mental health needs to be a part of a national elder care conversation? And this is, again, like I said, so close to my heart that I'd really like you to, tell me what are your thoughts on this?
So, women, my pet peeve with this is that as an economy, you're constantly talking about women joining workforce, but this is just theory. And I see even in younger generations, women dropping out of workforce and how, right? So, and it's either because of a child or because of caregiving of
And there
pet.
is a word for this, Neha, that they call this the penalty that we pay, for marriage and for being mothers, and the penalty that you pay with your life. And I'm sorry I'm interrupting you right now while you were talking because I quit my career. And this is a reboot for me after 17 years of being at home. And I quit my career at the pinnacle of my success because my son kept getting a lot of allergies, in Bangalore. And of course, the unspoken rule was this that I have to give up on my work. And yes, it was wonderful that I got to spend time with him and he's cleared of his allergy. But to come back after 17 years, Neha, was, I can't even begin to tell you how 17 and a half, probably 18 years, because I was the only one who was looking after this huge home, that had been thrust upon me. The responsibilities had been thrust all on me without asking me what my ambitions were, what my thoughts were, what is it that I wanted out of life, And even if I tried to bring up this conversation, people would just shush you out saying that, well, you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a daughter, and this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, or you're a very strong person. Only you can
Oh,
do with
yes,
you.
I
You can
get
do.
that
So the
all the time,
narrative,
Neha,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I hate it. I
yeah.
hate
Sometimes
that
yeah, I'm
word
not.
strong.
Yeah,
I hate
yeah.
it when I'm told that I'm strong because no, I don't want to be strong. If this is strong for you, where, all of my dreams, my thoughts, my health, my sleep, my, things need to be kept aside just to keep, somebody else's boat bobbing on the, floating on the sea, then I don't want to be this strong. So yeah, coming back to talking about why this deserves to be a national conversation, please tell me.
It totally does, especially if I talk about young country economy. Why it needs to be the government's problem over here to solve for this is you need to solve for 50% of your workforce to be in place. It's as simple as that. We need it from an economic lens, we need it from the development of these countries lens, and we need for the private sector and the public sector to enable this to happen. And firstly, it obviously has to begin with conversations like this. You're so brave to come and talk and share openly about it. Not everyone does this, to be very frank. There's still stigma is so, so strong around these conversations that people would rather keep quiet and, fizzle away, but not talk about it. And this is important. Today, I'm sure so many people would be listening to you and saying, yes, I went through this and I'm going to talk about it and enable someone else. It's about enabling that one person else. So, firstly, it
Absolutely.
is this conversation. Yeah, it is awareness, it is normalizing that this takes a lot and this is not okay. It's not okay. I am not going to be the giver. Women need to stand up and demand for that. It's happened in childcare, right? Today, you see all these. I mean, my husband is an equal parent completely. And it's not because I asked him to. He understands this, he sees it, he believes in it, he has the conviction to be an equal parent. It's the same thing for caregiving. If it's not a partner, it needs to be the ecosystem. The expectation of relatives should be that we need to solve for this and not enable the other person the other way that, oh no, come on, you can do it, you're the strong one. And systemically, I think workplaces have done it again for childcare. The law has mandated, like for example, daycare center, creches, right, for certain organizations of certain sizes, so that you have a solution to leave your child when you're coming to work. Is the same thing for elder care. So the HR initiatives of every organization needs to include parent care. And I know those conversations are, by the way, happening in India. There are many organizations who kind of approach people in this space that, okay, what is it that we can do, even if it is a simple subscription, like enabling emergency management, or caregiver in place, and activities for my mom, and so on, daycare spaces for elders, communities, clubs. So all of these need to be in space. Only then the woman caregiver can feel less guilty, more empowered, and truly feels that it's practical answer for my problem. I don't want theory. Don't give me gyan. Tell me exactly how the load on my plate is going to reduce, where I feel, just like a mom would feel completely at peace if I've picked the right daycare and school, that my child is well looked after, and I then therefore don't feel guilt. It's the same thing, right? I know my mom or my dad is well looked after. I can now go and live my life for a couple of hours. So these are the solutions that need to be in place.
So Neha, through your organization Epoch, you work with families at their most vulnerable space. And there are moments when I guess families are breaking down, they're exhausted. So can you just share a story with our listeners that shows how professional, compassionate elder care can look like and can ease a caregiver's burnout, and become like a trusted partner and not just a service, because I think this is such a it's such a personal space. What is it that makes Epoch different, especially given that your personal equity in this whole thing?
Yeah, we are certainly trying. I think still it's a constant learning process. I will not say that as an organization we have cracked it, but yes, there are many, many positive stories that happen every day, which keeps us inspired, because the only way to feel inspired and get going is when you see impact. So I'm very impact driven. And if I don't see a change, and for me impact can be very small also. I don't have to prove that I've made impact in 10,000 lives. Of course that's the vision, but if I see that I've changed the lives of 100 families, 50 families, it started with 10 families, I know I have solved someone's problem, and that gives me a lot of gratitude. So I always tell my team that, firstly, I am very grateful to you. I'm immensely grateful, because I couldn't have built anything, or created any solution, if I didn't have like-minded people who understood the space, because it's not just about a job or a business. It's not that, right? There are many other ways of pursuing a career. So people who have stayed here for the right reasons, that's so important. And I think there are many stories, but one very a pattern that I see, especially in dementia, is the you talk about consent. And what I mean by that is, will your parent agree to come to an assisted living home? And when someone has dementia, you cannot ask this question, right? That, mom, okay, I'm moving you to a care home. And it's so convoluted in a way, right? Because you're like, my mom doesn't understand, but how can I just move her from a house where she's always been all the time? And how do I, she doesn't even know that I'm going to move her. How can I not take her permission for such a big life changing decision? So, navigating this piece, we partner with families where we explain to them that, yes, we understand the emotional load of taking this decision. We are there with you, but unfortunately your parent can't make this decision. They are not, their brain doesn't have the biological capacity to use judgment, right? So it's a scientific reason, it's not an emotional reason for why they cannot partake in this decision making. And it's also, in a way, I feel, dealing with guilt, because you're so guilty, you just want to hear that, yes, it's not your decision, it's my decision to move. And honestly, that will not come. So people need to get it. Very rarely with and will an elder say these sentences: yes, put me in a care home. Yes, I am happy in a care home. Yes, you have been a good child. Unfortunately, no, no, and no. We will have to live with it. So that decision making, that emotional journey is what we navigate, explaining to them that they cannot, explaining that why moving them to a care home will be so will have significant impact on the quality of life for both themselves and their parent. And of course, we have to walk the talk. We have to, in a few weeks time, show the positive impact, because that's the only way families will be guilt free. And that's that one goal I have, that are you feeling better about taking this decision of moving your parent to Epoch? Are you feeling better or worse? Of course, there are misses we go through, like I said, because expectations are so high, more in this space. Very rarely are customers really like, saying that you've exceeded expectations. There are families who truly understand what it takes, but there are also families who are constantly dealing with their own emotional baggage. So, they would be so unhappy about everything. So helping them navigate through this first decision making of moving to a home, staying in a home, then visiting every time, and slowly, a day comes when probably the elder says, who are you? Or I've seen moments where the elder has actually looked at our nurse and thought that that's their child.
Yeah.
And these are very tough, and no amount of training etc can
No.
kind of equip team members. So these are just conversations and orientations. How do you make the family feel better about this decision? So that's where we are. um, Lots to learn, honestly, lots to learn.
So, India is really aging very fast than it's prepared for, in awareness, infrastructure, and policy. And it's all still lacking, really. These conversations are, I think, we are really the first people talking about it and acknowledging it. So, over the next decade, how do you think we need to rethink elder care as a shared social responsibility rather than something that families just have to deal on their own with a crisis? Because this is really a social issue. And nuclear families, we already spoke about it. So tell me what, how is it that we
Absolutely.
equip? It's scary.
Yes, and the numbers are all there.
Oh, yeah.
People in the industry, we constantly try to, kind of talk about the numbers that we are looking at about 350 million, 20% of the population, in by 2050, which is a large, large, large number, right? And if we don't have the plan in place now, then we are going to be dealing with the silver tsunami, as people call it. And therefore, the significance of this industry needs to be very, very, high. So prioritizing it both from a government, the government stepping forward and encouraging, service providers and players in this space to build businesses, regulations and standards kicking in. So whoever is doing it the right way. So, a lot of regulations have already come into the space, so that, service providers know that, there are certain frameworks within which you need to work, because this is a vulnerable part of the section we are talking about. And like I said, a couple of examples. One example of a wrong thing gone, it impacts the whole industry. You're painted with the same color. Once someone does wrong, everyone is judged in the same way, and it just makes the decision more difficult. So yeah, infrastructurally, I think many things need to happen. There definitely needs to be our medical ecosystems, primary, secondary, tertiary. They need to have specializations in place. So geriatrics as a field, that definitely needs to come up. We need more geriatricians. We need more geriatric nurses, social workers, therapists, so that they understand that the lens, just like you understand that the lens for a child is different, and hence the whole science of pediatrics. It's the same thing for an elderly. The needs of an elderly is completely different. And therefore, we need workforce in place. You need more. Nothing will happen if we don't have people. So, a lot of caregivers, trained caregivers, professional caregivers who are equipped to handle the load, courses that are run in government hospitals and nursing colleges, caregivers, physiotherapists, all the allied healthcare scientists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, nutritionists, all of this ecosystem. So it indeed takes a village, and much more also in an elder care. I think that statement needs to go, it needs to become a proverb as well, that needs a village and much more to care for an elderly. So and then finally I think the insurance sector, so we should not underestimate how financially draining caregiving can be, and that also is a major contributor for how or what a person goes through and the load that they share. So insurance has to come into the picture. You need to be insured. There needs to be products into place. Social security, I mean, we know how the West has solved for this. I'm sure there are encouraging signs from government. They're also doing a lot of conversations, whether at the government level, ministry level, at the Niti Aayog level. So awareness is definitely coming for kind of solving for this. But I think conversations need to translate into actions, and that's when we'll see the real change.
So, Neha, if there's just one thing that you'd like a son, a daughter, or a caregiver who's listening to us right now, what would you like to tell them?
Um, you won't be alone if you really, really ask for help. There is a lot of help available. As of today, I can tell you that there are many people who are wanting to solve this problem. So just stop thinking, go out and reach out for professional help. Don't underestimate how your life can change for the good.
So, for all our listeners, if this conversation has moved you, share it with someone who's caring for an aging parent or quietly worrying about the future as to what is in store for them. So, let's bring elder care out of the shadows and into the conversations that really matter. Follow the Mohua Show for more stories that change how we see the world. And it's been an absolute honor, Neha, to have you today with us. We wish Epoch Elder Care all the best. And thank you for taking out the time and being on today's podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure. I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you, Moa.
Thank you.